Hey everyone, my name is Bennett Townsend, and I'll be going over POP3S and SMTPS for class this week. So through research, was able to find a couple things on POP3S. So POP3 actually stands for Post Office Protocol, and essentially it's an internet protocol, and it's one of the most common protocols actually to receive email. So the three actually refers to the third iteration of the protocol POP3 or POP. And POP3 utilizes TCP IP connections over port 110. Now, POP3S is a more secure version of POP3, where S actually stands for securely, and it communicates through SSL or secure socket layer, and that communicates over port 995. And what that does is ensures encryption of the communication, where POP3 only uses plain text communication. So now some steps of operation of the POP3S protocol. So as I mentioned, POP3S, it listens on the 995 port, and it'll listen until a request is made. And what will happen is a TCP connection will be made between the requester and the server host. So the connection or session, it must be authorized, and this is actually done by the POP3S server. And it'll send a greeting to the corresponding host, and then this is more or less referred to the authorization state. So next, the communication will be between the POP3S server and the corresponding host. It'll continue in the transaction state where commands and session is, or I'm sorry, where commands and requests are made. So these commands and requests can consist of maybe keywords, status updates, arguments, and any other additional information that may be needed for that connection. Now, next, the session will enter the update state. Um, Once the session is issued to quit, the POP3S server will actually issue a goodbye and release any acquired resources from the transaction state. And then the connection will be closed and the POP3S will delete the message. So a few advantages and limitations. POP3S is simple and efficient protocol, which is great for simple email requests. It also provides the ability to access and retrieve email while offline, and it's ideal for any bulk email messages, both sending and storing those. So because the emails are downloaded and then deleted from the server, POP3S is not meant for any type of email manipulation or really synchronization, and any other protocols or other protocols should be used if you're planning on doing that. So a few hardening recommendations that I found was one to require the SSL certificate. So there are ways around POP3S protocol where you don't have to require an SSL certification. So actually requiring it, and more or less it'll ensure that no plain text authentication mechanisms are used. So what you'll have to do is open one of the or the config file within Dovecot, and you'll have to change SSL from yes to required, and then restart Dovecot. And what this will do is, again, it'll require the secure SSL connection. Next is disable any plain text authentication. So this setting will actually ensure the client uses the SSL connection, and if they don't, the authentication will fail. So this will ensure that any passwords are not leaked through plain text, and you can do this by opening again another Dovecot config file and adding a line of disabling plain text authentication. The last one that I found was password protect key files. So to ensure SSL key files are password protected, I'm sorry, you need to ensure that SSL key files are password protected and ensure Dovecot has a password. So the key password can be included in the SSL config file, and these files are actually world readable. So it's not recommended to put the key password in these files, the config files. So what you want to do is to further secure it, a new file needs to be created and then reference that file within the config file where those keys are placed. So next, SMTPS. So SMTPS is also an email and internet protocol, and it actually stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol Secure. That's where the S comes in. SMTPS is again the same as SMTP protocol, except SMTPS encrypts its data with the SSL certificate, similar to POP3 versus POP3S. And so SMTP is less secure and communicates through plain text. So this protocol is responsible for sending emails across the internet through a defined set of rules, allowing email clients and accounts to exchange information. So what happens is when an email is sent from the email client, an SMTPS connection is established, and based on the commands given, it'll decide how the email is handled, such as message contents. Um, some of the commands include message contents, recipient's email, and sender's email. So HELO or EHLO, kind of like hello, is a command code that begins the sending process, and it requires a reply from the other email client, HELO, and it'll reply with a domain name and IP address. Next is mail from, and this will identify who the mail is actually from, and it signifies a new transaction. And what will happen is the SMTPS server will then be ready to accept the email address, and it'll reply with a 250 OK code once it's been accepted. So receipt to or RCPTO will follow the 250 code, and it identifies who the recipient is or who will receive the email. And a RCPTO command will continue until all the defined recipients are reached. So if you have more than one individual who you're sending the email to, the RCPTO command will continue until it's sent to all those recipients. Then there's a DATA command. It'll initiate the data transfer, and it'll include the message contents, and it'll be initially transferred to the SMTPS server from the client email. So if the transfer is accepted, it'll then be ready for delivery, to which another 255 OK code is sent by the server, and the message will be sent to the recipient. And then lastly is quit or QUIT command. It's utilized once the email is sent, and the email client will send a QUIT command to the server, essentially ending the connection, and a 221 code will be sent to signify the connection has been successfully closed. So RESET is one other command. It's used when a mail transaction needs to be terminated, and that's usually reasons for involving maybe the wrong recipient was entered in, or the connection is not completely closed, but is more or less reset, and all data involving the message and parties will be removed. So as far as adding it to the IIS server, so the way the SMTPS server can be added to IIS, it can be done by opening the server manager, selecting IIS, and scrolling down to roles and features. You'll select the drop down in the top right, and you will select add roles and features. You'll select role based or feature based when it comes in the pop-up, and then you'll select next until you reach the feature screen. So once you reach the feature screen, you'll scroll down and you'll see a box or an option to select SMTP server. And then you'll just select add features, next, and install. And then it'll begin the installation of SMTPS server on your IIS server. And then as far as postfix on Linux and SMTPS, so postfix Postfix is an open source mail transfer agent, or MTA, and it'll send email to external and internal accounts. So Postfix offers many customizations. It's pretty customizable, as you'd imagine, because it's open source. So you have a junk mail control, address manipulation, as well as a large number of protocols that are supported. There's container support, and it actually supports quite a few databases such as MySQL, MLBD database, Memcache database, and quite a few others. So a few hardening recommendations I found for both IIS and Postfix. Um, we'll start with IIS. So requiring TLS. Um, so requiring TLS is actually not enabled by default. And what it is it's necessary to ensure that no communication is being sent through plain text, and it'll ensure that communication is encrypted. So what you'll do is you'll navigate to the IIS 6.0 manager, select SMTP virtual server, select properties, select access under secure communication, check require TLS encryption, ensure that it is selected. Next, configuring connection control and relay restriction. So this will ensure only necessary clients are utilizing the server for both consumption and security reasons. And again, you'll do this by navigating to IIS 6.0 Manager, right-clicking on SMTP Virtual Server number 1, and you will be selecting access within the Properties tab for connections as well as relay restrictions, and you will be selecting only the list below will have access to your server. And then requiring authentication, obviously requiring authentication is always good, but extra layer of protection. So when connecting to SMTPS server, it'll ensure emails are not being sent by users without permission to do so. And this is again done in IIS 6.0 Manager. And then you'll right click SMTP virtual server number 1 and going to properties under access, you'll do authentication tab, and then you'll want to unselect anonymous access and select basic authentication and Windows authentication, and ensure that, as I mentioned before, TLS encryption is checked and being used. Postfix. So I found disabling verify or VRFY. It'll ensure any outside users cannot verify existing accounts in your environment, and it'll help with preventing any possible spam or malicious emails being delivered. And you'll actually enable this. I'm sorry, it is enabled by default for any troubleshooting purposes, but it should be disabled. And what you'll do is you'll manipulate a config file or use the postconf command to change verify to yes. Next is configure hello or HELO with SMTPS. This will ensure that a response is being made by another email client. A lot of times malicious email domains or clients will not have this configured. So a lot of times this is where malicious activity is coming from, and it'll reduce that traffic or emails. And again, you can manipulate a config file or use the postconf command. And then last is configure relay host. So smart host is a postfixes term for the host, and that'll accept email requests. And typically, it's only configured for a few devices and authenticating the relay host to other devices that are accepting emails. This can be done by first configuring the relay host. So there's quite a few ways you can manipulate configure files, as well as use some post-conf commands as well. That is everything that I found through my research, and here are my references for this week. And as always, I look forward to seeing what everyone else found and what you have to say about my research.